Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 16th of December 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Well, we must continue with election analysis, Mike. I think.
Well, just looking at the fallout from it continues in the mainstream press following the weekend. Of course, Thursday we'll see a Queen's speech, a pared down Queen's speech, not the full ceremony of the one in October. It's going to be pared down, but Boris has said that he's going to put into law an extra £40 billion for the NHS up until 2023, or at least by 2023-24. That's good news, isn't it?
Yeah, it is good news, and I wonder where the money came from. It just pops up. The odd £34 billion is suddenly available, whereas up till now we've been in a period of austerity.
Well, I mean, you've got to invest if you're going to sell something off. You've got to do that. But anyway, Dominic Cummings apparently is going to deal with the civil service. He has had enough of the fact that once you're a career civil servant, it's practically impossible to get rid of you. If Mark Sedwill is the first to go, then I will believe that they are serious about dealing with this problem. But of course, it is a problem. We've got somebody at the head of the civil service, also at the head of the intelligence services, and who's also the head of the cabinet office. And Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings complaining apparently that they can really get nothing done in number 10 Downing Street because of the civil servants. So they're going to deal with that.
It's not the career politicians that are a problem, it's the civil servants.
Yes, well, I mean, there is a certain amount of truth. I take your point, but there is a certain amount of truth in it. Of course, they're going to spend lots of money. Apparently, austerity is over. But looking at the Metro here, Boris Johnson to make £34 billion NHS pledge in Queen's speech. But what else was going on? Well, apparently they were attacking the BBC. So here is The Independent. The Independent's headline is "Consciously Biased BBC Contributed to Tory Election Win, Labour MP Says." Well, this is very strange because Boris Johnson was attacking the BBC for not being very good as far as he was concerned, either with their election coverage. And so he's claiming that he wants to decriminalise the TV licence immediately, review it altogether at some point in the not too distant future. So the BBC speaks to a pro-Remain metropolitan bubble in Islington, not the real world represented by Wakefield and Wokington. There's been a failure by senior management at the BBC, and we expect them to launch an internal review of their performance, is the position that Boris and co are taking. So will we see the end of the TV licence? I think there are many people would applaud that. But look, what I think we're going to talk a little bit more about this on Friday's UK Column News in a bit more detail. But what I'm beginning to see here, Brian, is the first stages of every institution being attacked.
Yeah.
And you know, we are very critical at the UK Column of the civil service, of our institutions, because they're basically doing a very bad job and have been for many years. But of course, that is as a result of reforms, in inverted commas, following on from Tony Blair's reforms of the House of Lords, right through to a whole range of reforms that have happened in the 40 years since. So you can't then take the fact that institutions have been reformed into non-functioning institutions and then say, well, we've got to get rid of the institutions completely at this point, because I think we'll find the direction of travel isn't necessarily most positive for ourselves for the future.
Well, of course, the pieces fit. We can look back with hindsight now. We can see that if you destabilise the institutions, then you can come up with all the excuses for the reform and the change. Probably that brings us to big society, which we'll introduce a little bit in a few moments' time.
But the Express here, Sophie Ridge grills Richard Bergen on Labour's biggest mistake during the election. Apparently their biggest mistake was underestimating the desire for people who voted leave to leave the European Union. That is probably one of the most stupid statements I've ever heard anybody come off with. I mean, in a sense it's true, because the Labour Party completely went the wrong tack with respect to Brexit, but really, could they underestimate the desire for people who voted leave to leave? This is nonsense in a sense.
It is, Mike, but it's one that causes me some problems, because I wonder whether inside the party they've and this could be Labour Party, or it could be Conservatives, or it could be Lib Dem, certainly could be the Greens, where they've started to believe their own rhetoric. So what we see is happening in the country, as obvious, surely if 17.4 million people voted out, they should see it. They live this world inside the party and they don't see this, but maybe that's just a figment of my imagination.
But look, the question is, was their biggest mistake in underestimating the desire for people who voted leave to leave, or was their biggest mistake underestimating the fact that the British and some international establishments wanted to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn as leader?
Well, we're going to come on to that.
Right.
And let's bring in Breitbart. And this is quite interesting. Heading Delling poll, if Boris can't counter the red menace in education, this is the last ever Conservative government. I'm going to give a big thank you to the person who sent this through to me. So let's have a look at the sorts of things this article is talking about. It would have proved a salutary lesson to all those university brainwashed kids who think the only problem with communism is that it hasn't been tried properly yet. Well, we did warn you. We could have said to Araminta in her tattered F. Boris t-shirt as she tucked ruefully into her pony chi. I don't know what this means, but this is the next bit that interests me. Now you know what fully automated luxury communism tastes like. This isn't a joke either. Just have a look at this terrifying map of how the general election result would have turned out based on the 18 to 24-year-old vote. And this is the key part of this article, that they are focusing on what the youth vote was, and that a lot of that was towards Labour. So this is what they then put up. Here's the map. Now they are saying this data came from YouGov. I did go to see whether there was a specific YouGov data package that proved this map. I couldn't find it. I'm not saying it wasn't there, so I'm going to take it that they have used YouGov's statistics to produce the map. But my goodness, they are really ramping up here that there is a Labour red menace in youth. It says if these kids had had their way, then the world's fifth largest economy would have been reduced within a few months to the status of Venezuela-style basket case, with private property confiscated, freedom of speech muzzled, taxes rocketing, Jews persecuted, terrorists appeased, national security surrendered. This is really quite extraordinary stuff. The vitriol coming out here. All those lessons they had in school about the rise of Nazi Germany and the rise of the Bolsheviks, if any, clearly made no impact whatsoever on their tiny minds. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour barely even attempted to conceal its anti-Semitism, its fondness for terror groups like Hamas, its hatred for the West, its thuggishly totalitarian instincts, let alone its hard-left economic agenda. Yet still the kids had no compunction about voting for these thugs. This is just mind-boggling propaganda and rhetoric to stir up trouble. And of course, what are we saying again? Well, thuggish, Nazi-like, anti-Semitic. Anybody who voted Labour has got this label. This is absolutely extraordinary. So how does it go on? Well, let's have a look at the Times of Israel. Anti-Semitism and Brexit shatter Corbyn's dreams of global far-left revolution. Labour leader attracted young supporters, but wider public failed to warm to him over his refusal to take a position on Brexit, accusations of Jew hatred and sympathy for terrorists. So it's very interesting that we've got this big anti-Semitic thrust against Labour, and here it is being thrown back by the Times of Israel. So what did they come out with? Well, Jeremy Corbyn had hoped to become the vanguard of a global socialist movement, but will step down in humiliation after overseeing his party's worst election defeat since 1935. So Mike, what is this global socialist movement? Did you read anything about this in the media?
No, I haven't heard him talking about that.
No, I haven't read anything. I haven't seen anything in the UK press and media about this. But here's the Times of Israel labelling this man, and of course, very emotive picture because we've got Jeremy Corbyn standing there waiting for the result with a Conservative gentleman with his Jewish cap on in the foreground. But it goes on. Excuse me. His vision attracted droves of young supporters, celebrity backing and the endorsement of other figures of the global socialist movement, with high-profile US Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sending a supportive tweet on polling day. Well, this is outrageous.
So, right, okay. So let me understand this. Somebody tweeting support from across the Atlantic, that now represents a global socialist movement building, does it?
Yeah, it appears to. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's go on because they go on, but the wider public failed to warm to him, a situation made worse, there we go, by his refusal to take a position on Brexit. And the Conservatives accused Corbyn of offering only more uncertainty over Brexit and portrayed him as a desperate conspiracy theorist. So now we've got conspiracy theory being used as a weapon in mainstream politics. They also warned he was a security risk, a view echoed by a member of his front bench. And at that point, Mike, I could say, well, of course, UK Column has been warning about the integration of UK and Israeli counter-terrorist organisations and intelligence services. So what's going on here? Now, what caught my eye was the journalists, rings there now on your screen. We've got a lady called Alice Ritchie and a Robin Millard. And I was just curious at what sort of journalist would produce this. So let's have a little look at how this thing comes together. And the first clue that this is not exactly as it seems comes from the opening of the article. And this is what you find: London AFP, and then it says Jeremy Corbyn had hoped to become the vanguard of the global socialist movement. Now, the AFP is an association of French press, a global news agency delivering fast, accurate, in-depth coverage of the events shaping our world, from conflicts to politics, economics, sports, entertainment, and the latest breakthroughs in health, science and technology. So my question really is, did the journalists write this, or was this out of this agency? I'm not quite sure how this works. But who are they? Well, here's Robin Millard. You can find him writing for the Times of Israel. I just chose a couple of his articles. But interestingly, I also found that he's also contributed to the Daily Star of Lebanon. And I found that was a rather odd mix for a journalist who seems capable of quite a lot of rhetoric, as we've just seen. And this is his colleague Alice. Sorry, that should be Alice. Millard shouldn't be in there. Beg your pardon for that. Alice Ritchie. And we also find that she's in the Daily Star Lebanon as well as the Times of Israel. So it's just a fascinating piece of journalism. And I'd like to know more about who these people really are and what their allegiances are. But let's get a bit deeper, because this was passed through to me. It's a tweet: "Grim times ahead. I blame Labour more than the Tories for enabling this. The IHRA was the red line." Well, what are they talking about there? Well, this is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And let's remember, this is the organisation that set the label on what is anti-Semitic and what is not. But the meat of this tweet is Eric Pickles. To rapturous applause in Jerusalem, Eric Pickles expresses pride that new incoming Conservative government under Boris Johnson will make it illegal for any public body to engage in any way with BDS. BDS is anti-Semitic and should be treated as such. And if you don't know what BDS is, it's the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, which is a Palestinian-led movement for freedom, justice and equality, talking about boycotting to make a protest against Israel. So, Mike, we can't solve jobs or the economy, which I believe is at zero growth. That's something that's being talked about today. But immediately after the election, We've got Eric Pickles receiving praise for what he's going to do for Israel, what he's going to do for Israel over and above what he's doing for the UK. It's astonishing. And I was also sent this. Somebody got a screenshot of the BBC News website on Friday. And what can we see in this? Well, it's this one here. Gove pays special thanks to Britain's Jews. And I was fascinated with this, Mike, because we can ask some questions. Which Jews are we talking about? Are these the wider community, or are we talking about very wealthy Russian Jews that have put money into the Conservative Party? Are we talking about people connected to the Israeli government or the intelligence services? If this label was Britain's Italians, for example, or Britain's Germans, I think there will be a lot of interest in the press as to what he's actually talking about, and have we had a foreign power interfering in Britain's elections? Well, if I can remind you, and this is the background that caught my eye when we talk about change in UK society, my big society. Of course, the Conservative objective was big society, and it is running in the background. It has never gone away. But here's Michael Gove, and the Electronic Intifada has got a very measured article, but simply pointing out his connections, saying that he's been working for a Murdoch title, but basically he's been supporting Israel everywhere he can. And it's also pointing out that he's been a government chief whip. And this raises an interesting question of blackmail, because is it the case, we've seen this with child abuse and Tim Fortescue saying that Conservative whips fixed it when people have been involved with children. For example, immense power in the whips to make sure that people vote the way somebody wants them to. So it was Gove doing this in his job for the UK government, or was it for an overseas government? It's very difficult to put your finger on. And of course, here's the declaration that this man is also saying, well, it's just common sense to be a Zionist. So is his priority UK or Israel? We've no way of knowing.
No. Okay, well, let's move on. Well, here we have a pipeline. And the question is, what happens when you put sanctions on your allies? This is something. Are we starting to get some hint of what future US-EU relations are going to be like in the not too distant future? Because this is all about the US doing exactly that, putting sanctions on the EU, or at least EU-based companies. This is under the 2020 National Defence Authorization Act. It was given approval in the House of Representatives on the 11th of December. There's a Senate vote expected in the not too distant future, and Donald Trump is expected to sign the bill before the end of the year. And so you can imagine that the EU has had something to say about this. So here is Heiko Maas, and he has said that European energy policy must be decided in Europe, not the US. We fundamentally reject foreign interference, and as a matter of principle, extraterritorial sanctions. Okay, well, I think the EU is putting its own sanctions on others and attempting to interfere as a foreign power in other nations. So perhaps there's a bit of hypocrisy in that. Here we have Phil Hogan, who's the EU Trade Commissioner, saying the EU opposes the imposition of sanctions against any EU companies conducting legitimate business. And he said the Commission objective has always been to ensure that Nord Stream operates in a very transparent and a non-discriminatory way with the appropriate degree of oversight. And this is all about, of course, Nord Stream 2 and also Turkstream. The US intending to put sanctions on the EU or on EU-based companies over those two pipelines, and the EU getting very upset about it. So the question is, are we starting to see a divergence here? Is this going to be representative of future US-EU relations? And perhaps what was going on at NATO a couple of weeks ago, where there were clearly problems between the US and certainly Macron and in particular, but and the EU. This is going to be an interesting 2020 as this develops.
I think it's going to be fascinating because on one hand we've got the ramping up for war, we'll say that in the Eastern Bloc. There's no money for that, and Boris Johnson is already questioning the mod over the waste of money. But we've got 34 billion magicked up for the NHS. So it's a very confused situation. They're playing globally strategic games, I think, at this point.
Absolutely. Now, quick reminder, if you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where there are various options there for joining us. And also a quick reminder that AV 10.1 DVDs are available for sale on the UK column shop. If you would like to get those, Brian was speaking at that event, of course, alongside David Noakes, David Dubine, Graham Downing, and Ian R. Crane, along with others.
Indeed. I'll just add that the actual talk that I focused on was looking at changes in UK society and politics that had been predicted back from the 1980s, and we were now seeing actually happening, and asking how those things unfolded around us. So I think it's particularly pertinent as we see the changes and certainly the result of this election.
Right, let's move on to climate change, Brian, because it hasn't been a very good few days for those that are calling out a climate emergency. We can start off with the EU here. And of course, the EU wants to be climate neutral by 2050, but sadly that doesn't look quite so likely. So this was the European Council was meeting last week, and they failed to convince all the 27 EU countries to sign up to this goal of being climate neutral by 2015. Poland, of course, was the biggest fly in the ointment there. Because Poland has a largely coal-based economy, and it'd be particularly difficult for them to try to meet that deadline. So because they couldn't get agreement on it, they just decided that they would endorse the goal anyway, and they would grant Poland an exemption, and that they would revisit the issue at another time, in this case in June, at another leaders summit. So they weren't able to meet their target. They weren't able to agree a policy for moving forward, and so they just decided to push it down the road, which seems to have been exactly the same situation at the COP25 in Madrid. This was the longest climate talks on record so far, and they ended in what they were describing as a compromise deal. Failure seems like a more appropriate description of it. They extended negotiations to try to reach a final communique by 2 days, and they eventually managed to pull together a piece of paper which said some stuff but really didn't say anything. And all the really big issues that Greta and her friends were trying to deal with, carbon tax, cutting off credit to carbon polluters, these were all put off to the next meeting, which is going to be in Glasgow between the 9th and the 19th of November next year. So just like the EU, when they couldn't reach agreement, they just decided to push it back, and away they went. Anyway, this is what Mr. Guterres had to say. The international community lost an important opportunity to show increased ambition on mitigation, adaptation, and finance to tackle the climate crisis. And as we said, they have decided to put back the situation of cutting off credit to climate polluters. And of course, the person who had expressed a desire to see that was Mark Carney. Companies that don't adapt, if you remember, he said this a month or two ago, companies that don't adapt, including companies in the financial system, will go bankrupt without question. Well, the COP25 perhaps couldn't come to an agreement on this, but according to The Economist at least, the central banks certainly want to continue pushing forward this policy. So central bankers debate tackling climate change. Christine Lagarde thinks it's mission critical. Others thinks it's mission creep. So there's no agreement actually amongst the central bankers, but nonetheless, Mark Carney, of course, heading off to work for the United Nations on the issue of climate change. So perhaps we'll see further direction further moves in that direction there. And I just wanted to end with this because Greta Thunberg was tweeting this out yesterday, traveling on overcrowded trains through Germany and finally on my way home. And there she is sitting there on the floor of the train with her bags all around her, looking very uncomfortable, except that Deutsche Bahn didn't really appreciate this piece of propaganda. And they tweeted out, it would have been even nicer if you'd also reported how friendly and competent you were looked after by our team at your seat in first class. So that's obviously a Google Translate of what they said in German. So really Greta's PR team needs to be a bit more savvy about the fact that they are going to get called out if they try to pull off this type of propaganda.
Well, the whole thing's a hoax. Anyway, in my opinion, Mike, so they're going to get caught out time and time again because the thing is not real. And this little girl is not capable of the role that they've put her in anyway. So I think we're going to just see more and more of this stuff.
Yes. Okay, let's come back to the UK and the National Council for the Training of Journalists. They have just released their annual report a few days ago. Well, the headline on the press release was "Journalists must call out lies," says NCTJ patron Alex Crawford. Alex Crawford, of course, works for Sky News. Well, what she's saying, she said, let's not forget our collective role is crucial in correcting the wrongs and the untruths, uncovering the reality, and perhaps most critical of all, calling out the lies on every occasion tirelessly. Somehow, it's now perfectly normal if you're a publicly selected official, world leader of industry or industry leader to tell lies. You're almost exceptional if you don't. And if we as journalists do not call out these lies every single time, then frankly, we're complicit in this growing addiction with fairy storytelling. And now, you may have fallen off your chair at this point,
no,
Brian.
I just thought, Mike, that if she really believes in this, she could come and join the UK column because this is what we do.
Sorry, Brian, wouldn't have her. But anyway, I just wanted to say, does she live by her own words? Well, not if you look at her coverage of Hong Kong, for example. So here's one headline from Sky News: Hong Kong protest, teenager brutally beaten by police speaks out. Here's another one: Hong Kong, the people forced to live in homes the size of a coffin. So it's one-sided, doesn't even come close to the truth. No mention of Western backing of the protest, for example. Calling out the lies, she said, but of course there's also lying by omission. Brian, and if you only tell one side of the story, then you're very much doing that. Now, let's also remind everybody, if you go and have a look at 21st Century Wire, published in May this year by Robert Inlakesh, Sky News collaborates with Idlib terrorists to create Syria war propaganda. So she was there in Idlib working with the terrorists and the other extremists there. One paragraph out of this I just wanted to highlight. Then we have our conversation with a well-known terrorist propaganda figure, Bilal Abdul Karim, who has appeared all over Syria with a number of Al-Qaeda-linked groups. He also, interestingly, felt comfortable introducing al-Nusra fighters wearing suicide vests on camera to his online audience. And this is the type of people that she was dallying with in Idlib in order to push the war rhetoric. But don't worry, she is going to make sure that she never tells any more lies again in the future.
Right. Well, we'll watch with interest on that.
And speaking of journalistic lies, we should just mention the OPCW report on Duma. Of course, we've covered it on this program. Patrick has covered it on this program a couple of times. Well, the question is, were the OPCW lying in the Duma report, and did the mainstream media call them out for it? Well, the answer is yes and no, respectively. So WikiLeaks over the weekend published a new release part 3 on the OPCW Duma report, and very interesting it is too. So in this release they have published the first draft of the OPCW's July 2018 interim report on the findings in Duma. The key things that they've discovered were that the symptoms of the alleged victims they were not consistent with chlorine gas poisoning. The OPCW inspectors couldn't find or couldn't explain why the gas cylinders which were claimed to have been dropped from Syrian aircraft, were undamaged by the fall, and how they apparently, one of them moved onto the top of a bed, for example. And they also concluded that either the victims were poisoned with a gas that they couldn't identify, but which certainly wasn't chlorine, or there was no chemical weapons attack at all. Now, the only mainstream media journalist who's even nearly covering this, and he's doing a pretty good job, is Peter Hitchens. So he was highlighting that Ian Henderson, who's a long-time OPCW inspector, he says here, Mr. Henderson tried to get the research included into the final report, but when it became clear that it would be excluded, he lodged a copy in a secure registry known as the Documents Registry Archive. And Hitchens went on to say, this is normal practice for such confidential material. But when Voldemort, this is one of the key OPCW, unnamed OPCW people, heard about it, he sent an email to subordinates saying, please get this document out of DRA and please remove all traces, if any, of its delivery, storage, or whatever in DRA. And really, this is pretty damning of the situation within the OPCW. As I say, Peter Hitchens, the only mainstream journalist who seems to be prepared to talk about this in the press. The Daily Mail should be applauded for publishing what he's writing, but Peter Hitchens absolutely needs people's support to keep going with this, because he is getting really heavily attacked on Twitter and other places by the usual suspects, Bellingcat and the like.
So they're calling for better investigative journalism, really getting in to expose the truth and everything. And then when a journalist does that, there's nobody standing next to him. Yeah,
but this is the wrong kind of investigative journalism.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Well, okay. Well, we'll move to local issues, and if you think Christmas coming up will lighten the mood, then it seems that in Plymouth, at least at the Barbican Theatre, they've got something else planned. Let's have a look at this little Plymouth Live headline: "The Grim Truth Behind Your Favourite Fairy Tale." So this is what's described as definitely an adults-only production, which might leave the strongest grown-up with a few nightmares, as it strips back the Grimm brothers' fairy tales to their gruesome original storylines and reinstates the discomforting themes contained within, from child abuse to murder, rape and even torture. So this is what's being fed to people in Plymouth this Christmas. But of course it's particularly interesting that if you're 16 or above, this is for you. And yet, of course, we've got many people warning about the rise in depression and suicide rates with young people. But Plymouth Live thinks that this is exactly the sort of production to give free advertising to.
It's perfectly reasonable. We've got to keep pumping darker and darker material into people's minds.
Indeed, except if people start to think that maybe there's something else going on. So I couldn't resist ending on this one. It's the Daily Star, with the headlines that scientists discover that mankind's belief in evil is caused by disease. Well, of course, they don't quite believe that, because this isn't fact, it's what they actually believe. So what's this about? It's as a result of a study by the University of Melbourne. This is the particular man in question. Brock Bastian, the Associate Professor of Psychological Sciences at Melbourne University. He says the research opens up new insights into the emergence of religion as a belief system that developed to explain natural threats or events. We uncovered consistent evidence that historical pathogen prevalence is related to an increased tendency to believe that there are forces of evil at work in the world. Such thinking remains evident in many modern societies, wherein health complaints are sometimes attributed to the will of God or the work of the devil and spiritual remedies. So that's one for messing up people's minds as we have a look at the politics unfolding in UK, the march towards a very aggressive society with breakdown, the movement to yet more wars overseas. But if you start to think that it's evil, actually
You're just ill.
You're just ill. And the person who sent it to me suggested that maybe we should be vaccinated in order to stop this evil problem. But I'll leave our viewers and listeners to have a think about that. But where don't you want to come for Christmas? It would appear Plymouth.
It's just as well I won't be here then.
Yeah, we'll end there. And just to say an apology for the coughing. That wasn't actually me. Somebody suggested I was coughing in the background. This is an animal-friendly studio, and our resident dog decided to cough at an inappropriate moment. That's it for today. We will be back at the same time on Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.